Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week we visit Kirby Hall, one of England's greatest Elizabethan and 17th century houses. Built by Sir Humphrey Stafford, but then passing ownership to Sir Christopher Hatton, who was the Lord Chancellor to Queen Elizabeth I. It was a large stone house that was built towards the end of the 16th century, but modified in several different campaigns within the first 100 years of its history, and then sadly abandoned in the early 19th century. Although this enormous mansion is partly roofless, the walls show us the exceptionally rich decoration that proclaims that its successive owners were always at the forefront of new ideas about architecture and design. So join us whilst we wander Kirby Hall. The building is laid out in 4 different ranges around a courtyard, with an outer court containing 2 archways that are joined by a stone wall, in a way that makes a smaller gateway. Entry into the main courtyard was through the northern range. 3 of the 4 courtyard ranges are unroofed, and the remaining court has a roof over part of its building. What I like about Kirby Hall right away was the symmetry, and that it was clearly an important element in the design and the build of the hall, with all of its courtyard facades facing forward. The main materials that were used were coarse rubble limestone, barnac stone to give it its iconic grey look, and ashlar that was used for the courtyard facades and for the beautiful architectural detailing all around the hall. Throughout the whole of Kirby Hall, you will see the many mason marks, which was an engraved symbol or a pattern that would have been found on the dressed stone on the buildings. You'll be able to see the various marks that have been cut onto the mouldings of the doors, the windows, and the sections of the frieze, and on the staircase handrails, really showcasing the finest decorations. Sir Christopher Hatton was an English politician who was a favourite of Elizabeth I of England. It's said that Hatton's dancing and handsome looks gave him the nickname the Dancing Chancellor, whilst they were at a masked ball, and that she was in his favour. Hatton went on to become the Vice-Chamberlain of the royal household, and even was one of the judges who found Mary, Queen of Scots, guilty of treason. Unfortunately, their relationship came to a halt when the Queen was tired of her admirer and insisted on the return of a crown debt, which was the money that was lent in advance to pay for some of the fine furnishings in the house. People have speculated that this broke Christopher's heart because he died shortly afterwards. Sir Christopher never married, but Kirby remained with his heirs and his successor, who was into the fashion of the day. He employed Inigo Jones, who was the first significant architect in England and Wales in the early modern period. He was known for his proportion and symmetry in his buildings, and was famously known for introducing classical architecture of Rome and the Italian Renaissance into Britain. He was brought in to redecorate the exterior in 1640, and on the north side of the rather spacious courtyard that occupied the centre of the building, Inigo's work, alongside with the work of John Thorpe, was blended together to create a masterpiece of beautiful architecture that makes you want to gaze at the building in awe. Just before we head inside the house, one of the most impressive views is the porch to the banqueting hall. It's just so amazing to see the delicate Renaissance carving across the capitals of the columns that alternate with the tall windows. It really does represent some of the most fantastic Elizabethan architecture of the 15th century, and it's mind-blowing that pieces like this exist outside in the elements untouched. The main structure consists of the quadrangular courtyard surrounded by buildings like an Oxford college, The long east and west sides were occupied by a series of small apartments and connected with one another, in which the households and the guests once resided. I have to say, one of my favourite places was inside the Great Hall, or the banqueting hall. Not only was I astounded with how large and gorgeous this room was, but it's just so great to see this medieval hall coming to life. Built by Humphrey Stafford in 1570, and like much of the house, it was refitted after in the 1670s. After being wowed by the ceiling, you can see above the east end that there were two doorways, which originally two doors led to the service rooms above in a passage. Interestingly, this layout is very familiar in many great halls, and this would have more than likely served as a minstrel's gallery too, where the musicians would play in the background whilst the household would have sat and ate on their long tables below, near the great fireplaces that would have had a roaring fire keeping everybody warm. This great hall was a little different though. Although it was used for special occasions, the Stafford family would head into their private rooms to eat, and this hall was used by the servants for dining and for popular card and board games when there were no visitors around. The Stafford emblems that decorate the courtyard also appear inside the hall, and along with their coat of arms. They would have hung expensive weapons and depicted stories of mythical heroes along the room. The Stafford emblem that decorate the courtyard also appear inside the hall, and along with their coat of arms, they would have hung up expensive weapons and depicted stories of mythical heroes alongside the room. It was incredible walking inside the house too. After the Great Hall, you were able to walk through a number of important rooms. A few that have been turned into a museum, showcasing the long history that Kirby Hall has been through, and the various people that have lived here, and also showing how some of the rooms would have looked, including the King's stateroom or his bedroom. Although the original is not there, you were able to get an understanding with how lavish and stately even the bed was. It was everything to the Hattons to make sure that they oozed royalty. This room was the most private and prestigious of all of the rooms here, reserved for only the honoured. King James I was known to have visited Kirby Hall 9 times between 1608 and 1624, and it's here that he would have stayed. During those royal visits though, the whole house would have been offered up to the royal entourage, and this bedchamber was the most closely protected and guarded room. The Great Chamber was used for entertaining important guests. It was modelled on buildings inside of royal palaces. In the early 1600s, the setting was different to how the room looks today. The walls were covered in beautiful tapestry, and they had 30 red leather seats for the guests that lined either side of the room. There was also a chair of state. This was the most important seat, upholstered in the finest materials and was lavishly decorated. During royal visits, it would have been used by the monarch when addressing their subjects. Today, the hall and its gardens are still owned by the Earl of Winchelsea, but it's managed and maintained by the English Heritage, as with many of the sites that we visit. Your visit can take you as long as you would like, but we spent a few hours enjoying the rooms and the sights here, but we were completely blown away with how much of this house still exists. There are toilets and a shop to grab a coffee whilst you sit and enjoy the views in the gardens. And another added bonus to your visit are the peacocks that wander freely around the site. We would encourage you to visit Kirby Hall if you're travelling around Northamptonshire. At its peak in the 1700s, the gardens at Kirby covered a total of 15 acres of land. To the south of the house, a system of terraces extended to the stream and stretched almost 1,700 feet, and then a planned wilderness at the top of the valley slope. The walled gardens would have been used for growing fruits and vegetables that needed the protection from the walls. The fruit trees in particular were grown against the walls to take advantage of the warming effect of the sun on the bricks. Back in its day, the fourth Christopher Hatton really enjoyed his garden and filled it with the most exotic and interesting plants that he could get his hands on, including 300 almond trees, pomegranates, and the hyacinth of Peru. These would have looked so beautiful on a summer's day. So if you've enjoyed the visit, please be sure to hit that like button. Consider joining our Patreon or channel memberships, using the links below or subscribing if you haven't done so already. It really helps us out. We want to say a big thank you to our channel members and to our Patreons for all of their support. So we'll see you in the next one. Till next time.